This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Rebels keep up attacks on civilians in eastern DRC despite government claims to have them on the defensive. Egypt's President El-Sisi says militias holding Libyan government hostage. And President Xi Jinping pledges firm support for Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region's government. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, still to come up on the program. Kenya's parliament approves multilateral tax treaty to boost fight against corruption. And Boeing's board mulls over the continued production of its 737 MAX jets. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where a landslide at a gold mine has left at least 24 people dead. The incident happened 40 kilometers from Watsa town in northeastern Ituri province. Local authorities have attributed the incident to heavy torrential rains that have been pouring over the area. 2 miners were rescued alive. This is not the first gold mine accident in the recent past. Just 2 months ago, more than 31 people were killed in a similar incident in Central East region. Well, staying in the DRC, 22 civilians have been killed by militants in the eastern town of Beni. The attack happened on Sunday night as rebels kept up attacks on civilians despite the government's claims to have them on the defensive. 13 women were killed in that attack. The incident came a day after 6 other civilians were killed in an attack also in Beni. About 180 other civilians are reported to have died in similar attacks in the region in late October when the Congolese army launched an offensive on the Allied Democratic Forces, a Ugandan Islamist group. The Congolese government now says the group is acting out of desperation. A surge in violence has led to protests against the government and UN peacekeepers. On the health front, insecurity has also complicated efforts to eradicate an Ebola outbreak in the area. Well, for more on this, we're now joined in studio by Matthias Mwindi, who is an independent risk analyst. Matthias, thank you so much for joining us. Well, rebels have kept up attacks on civilians despite the government, which had been saying that they're having some progress or some headways happening. We're seeing from what has just happened over the weekend, 22 people killed, that it seems as though this is a huge crisis that continues to happen. What is behind this surge of violence in the DRC?
One of the biggest causes of the current spike of violence is that the rebels seem to have opened new fronts in carrying out their attacks. Because when the offensive started in October, most of the previous activity was around the town of Beni. Then they were pushed out the government troops to surrounding regions where they carried more attacks. When the government forces moved there, they seem to be regrouping and getting back to Beni. So you realize that the Congolese government seems to be making some headway in this campaign, but they have not yet secured the region of Beni. The other thing is that the Allied Democratic Front for Rebels, ADF, are not the only rebel groups operating in Beni or maybe the wider North Kivu province. The Congolese army is battling an estimated 160 militia groups and rebel groups who have, let's say, a combined force of about 20,000 fighters. That's a huge number for a very poorly equipped and maybe trained military force to fight.
If you go back to the history of the DRC, I mean, there's just been, when it comes to conflict, it just seems that there's been decades of this going on. Now, when we talk about Beni, you were saying that this is a really small region in the DRC that is causing so much unrest, so much conflict happening. What would it take for there to be lasting peace in this region?
When you look at Beni and most of eastern DRC, that's the bedrock of the country's mineral wealth. Eastern DRC is a very underdeveloped area of the country, and you realize some of the socio-economic factors which have, reasons which have fueled this instability. They remain unresolved. The government needs to start looking at some of the socio-economic factors which are pushing people to these militias. The other thing is that we need political will to start dealing with some of these armed groups. Where you can negotiate, try to negotiate with that. That political will should also extend to foreign armed groups operating in DRC. They have been there since the early 90s. Some of them have not been acted upon. So That political will is needed to at least try to bring some semblance of stability in Eastern DRC, because it's not a DRC problem, it's also something affecting the wider region.
And you know what, every time we speak to our correspondent in the region, Chris Otomaringa, it just seems as though one of the things he talks about a lot is just how tired people are of how long this conflict has been taking place, and that it's just fatigue. And now we're seeing what's happening is that the people in that region are beginning to attack not only their armed forces, but also UN peacekeepers who are meant to be keeping the peace, and saying, you're not doing a good job at protecting us. What has the impact been for the people? Because we talk about the conflict and we hear about people dying. What has the socioeconomic impact been on the people that are there, just their ability to lead a normal life?
You are right. You cannot, if you are living in Eastern DRC, you cannot run a proper business without fear of armed attacks by whether it's militias and even some, what I can call indisciplined elements in the armed forces. The other thing is that, like you pointed out in this story, is that there are so many health issues which are going on in that region. Ebola is one of them. The violence has made it very difficult for you to deploy aid workers, not only just to deal with Ebola, but also just deliver any other forms of humanitarian assistance, whether you are dealing with schools, whether you are dealing with health, whether you are dealing with any other form of humanitarian assistance. You cannot deploy staff in a region which is very, very unstable. The other element is that continued instability is also now generating larger volumes or numbers of people who are being displaced. People are moving out of Beni into the surrounding regions, and that's just adding the pressure on the few aid groups operating in that. So if you are living in DRC, or especially in Beni, there is bound to be frustration. It's why we have seen now civilians attacking the UN, or maybe staging protests against the UN. They say, look, this is the biggest peacekeeping force in the world. It's having almost a budget of $1 billion a year, yet it cannot defeat a force which is basically less than 10,000 fighters. So you can get the level of frustration among civilians. They look at the government, they look at the UN, they look at the international community, they realize we seem to have been left on our own. That's why they are just very upset and launching these protests and even armed attacks on UN peacekeepers.
Thank you so much, Matthias Mwindi. Always good having you on the program. Matthias Mwindi, he is a risk analyst, speaking to us about the latest to come out of the DRC. Well, in Niger, leaders of the G5 Sahel have been holding crisis talks in response to the growing terrorist threat. The West African heads of state also visited the graves of Niger soldiers killed in a militant attack just days earlier. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson with the details.
This was the worst terrorist attack on security forces in Niger in living memory. Militants killed 71 soldiers at a remote outpost near the border with Mali. The attack was followed by a summit bringing together heads of state from the G5 Sahel countries.
I think that this summit was an opportunity for us to take fairly strong decisions, and that we will try to implement very soon on the ground.
5 West African nations are grouped under the anti-jihadist force known as the G5 Sahel: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger. Though backed by France and the United States, nearly 3 years after its launch, the task force remains perennially underfunded and hobbled by poor coordination.
We've taken stock. We've indeed found that we're not quite at the right operational level for the G5 Sahel force. The first reason is the dysfunction that exists between the commitments that were made by the international community and their concrete achievements on the ground, sometimes due to time-consuming funding disbursement mechanisms.
The UN says the security situation in the Sahel has deteriorated significantly, with the destabilization of Libya, the civil war in Mali, and the Boko Haram insurgency. Recent years have seen militants linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL strengthening their foothold. With violence on the rise, parts of the Sahel have already been rendered ungovernable. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
South Sudan's government says talks between President Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar are progressing well to try and resolve outstanding issues in the peace agreement. The government says its position is closer to that of Riek Machar's group and that it believes the parties will reach an agreement soon. Well, let's now across to CGTN's Patrick Oyet, who is on the line from Juba. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. It sounds like positive outcomes from that meeting between the two South Sudanese leaders. Can you give us more details, Patrick?
Yeah, the talks have been actually going on. There have been meetings between President Kiir and opposition leader Machar. They met on Monday evening. The meeting was, however, not long. It was a brief meeting that they promised that they would continue with the meeting on Tuesday. And, of course, the presidential advisor on security says that there is progress being made. However, they are not actually giving the public exactly in which area the progress is being made. They are not saying exactly what they have agreed on. Perhaps this is because they still think that those positions will change, but they are saying progress is being made. They are very optimistic. They are hopeful that the period they extended by 100 days, when it finishes, they will form a government, and they hope that all these issues will be resolved, outstanding issues. The opposition leader, Riek Machar, is in Juba. They're saying this is a positive move, and this is giving him really what is on the ground rather than listening to these members of the group who are here in Juba. So basically, yes, people are hopeful, but people do not know yet details of what is going on. On another note also, the issue which is there is that some of the members of the public in some states have also been demonstrating. Some, of course, after hearing that there is an agreement coming, there are rumors going on, and they are thinking that some of their states will be, of course, annexed to other states. So there are movements on the ground in regards to the issue of the number of states, the issue of security sector reform. The parties to the agreement are saying they expect training to begin this week. So yes, that is what is on at the moment.
Thank you so much, CGTN's Patrick Oyet, joining us there on the line from Juba. Well, Egypt's parliament has announced that it no longer recognizes the authority of Libya's government of national accord. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said on Sunday that the GNA was hostage to terrorist groups in Tripoli. Tensions have been mounting between Cairo and Tripoli, especially after the GNA recently signed a controversial maritime border deal with Turkey. Here's CGTN's Adel El-Muruhi with more.
The Egyptian Speaker of Parliament, Ali Abdel Al, announced this week that the Libyan Eastern Parliament is the only legitimate representative for the Libyan people. Abdel Al's statement disregarded any recognition to Faiz al-Sarraj, the head of the government of national accord. More critique from Cairo followed on Sunday. This time it was from the Egyptian president, who strongly supports the GNA's prime rival, General Khalifa Haftar.
National armies are responsible for security and stability in their nations. We say this so that there will be no role for armed militias or extremist militias or terrorism. Why can't the Libyan government have its own will there? Because it's a hostage to the armed and terrorist militias which are in Tripoli. This is the truth.
I think there's a transformation in the Turkish-Libyan relations regarding the presence of military troops in Libya. That has confirmed Turkey's involvement in supporting militias with finances and arms. That is making Cairo shift its stance towards Sarraj. It could be only to put pressure, at least for now.
Among these announcements from Cairo, division over al-Sarraj's authority appeared to be growing within the Libyan embassy to Egypt. A statement attributed to the embassy said that it no longer follows al-Sarraj's government. Later, another announcement denied it.
We've been expecting the Libyan embassy to shut down following that suspicious maritime border agreement between the GNA and Turkey. It has exposed the foreign influence over the GNA. Many Libyan politicians objected to that, amongst them officials in the Libyan embassy here, and they are no longer in agreement with Mr. al-Sarraj. The embassy here says it has shut down for security reasons, but many reports confirm the division amongst the embassy's employees.
The Egyptian government has not confirmed or denied the parliament's announcement disregarding al-Sarraj as a representative to Libya.
The relations between Egypt and Libya continue. Egypt will host talks to find common ground between the Libyan National Army and al-Sarraj's government. He depends on militias for support, and some of them adopt extremist and terrorist ideologies, which is something Egypt will never accept.
Following his critique, President al-Sisi said that Egypt is still pursuing a political agreement among Libyan factions. To end the division among Libyans, foreign intervention must halt, or at least the divide among regional powers for that conflict must be bridged. Adil al-Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Turkey's military pledge to Libya risks complicating matters in the region. CGTN's Michal Bardavid brings us more.
Turkey's key role in Libya could complicate matters in the region. Turkey is one of the main supporters of the UN-backed Libyan Government of National Accord, known as GNA. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has announced that Ankara is ready to send military support to Libya if requested by the GNA. Last month, Erdogan signed a deal with the Prime Minister of the GNA, Fayez al-Sarraj. The deal is twofold and impacts the region on two separate issues. The parties agreed on a maritime boundary, which infuriated Greece as well as Egypt. They also agreed on factors to launch a quick reaction force if requested by the GNA. This military deal would allow Turkey to send vehicles and equipment, so this could have an impact on the ongoing conflict inside Libya. It also creates potential risk with Russia. Moscow is backing the opposite side inside Libya, the Libyan National Army. It's been reported that Russian private fighters are supporting the Libyan National Army. So if Turkey does decide and is requested to send troops to Libya, they could potentially face Russian fighters in the region. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has stated that he wants to avoid any such conflict with Russia. He's expected to have a phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin on this topic this week. And Putin is also expected to visit Istanbul on January 8th. So while Turkey wants to make gain inside Libya, it will also have to consider balancing ties with other regional powers. This is Michal Bardavid for CGTN in Istanbul.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. And when we return, here's what you can expect. President Xi Jinping pledges firm support for Hong Kong SAR government. And Congo rolled out measles vaccination in Goma amid civil unrest.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping met today with Carrie Lam, the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. She was in Beijing to present her government's work reports to the central government. She pledged his firm support for Lam, her government, and for the Hong Kong police. CGTN's Lara Papan has more.
The most daunting year for Hong Kong since its return to China 22 years ago. That's how Chinese President Xi Jinping described the situation in the city during a meeting with Carrie Lam in Beijing. Carrie Lam was in the Chinese capital to report on Hong Kong and the work of the Special Administrative Region's government. President Xi praised Lam for upholding the one country, two systems principle, and he praised her government for administering the SAR according to law. He spoke highly of her government's active response to social concerns and a series of policy measures to help enterprises and relieve poverty. Xi Jinping reiterated his remarks during the BRICS summit last month when he expressed the central government's stand on the situation in Hong Kong. He said China is determined to safeguard national sovereignty, security, and its development interests, implement the one country, two systems policy, and oppose any external interference in Hong Kong affairs. The president reaffirmed the central government's support for Lam's leadership of Hong Kong. Xi also said Beijing stands by the Hong Kong police's strict enforcement of the law. He also hoped people from all sectors in Hong Kong society will work together to restore Hong Kong's development on the right track. Lara Parpan, CGTN.
Carrie Lam spoke with the press after her meeting and passed on President Xi's wishes for Hong Kong.
It is of particularly worthwhile to highlight that in his opening remarks, President Xi Jinping also mentioned that he very much hoped that all sectors in Hong Kong society will join hands in order to achieve this objective of ending the violence and return Hong Kong to a normal situation. So that has also been my appeal over the last few months. And I hope very much that Hong Kong people will help the SAR government and support the police in achieving this mission.
Health authorities in the DRC, along with the World Health Organization, have launched a measles immunization campaign. This third phase, taking place in the city of Goma, aims to reach 19 million children before the end of the year. The epidemic has already killed thousands this year, with low immunization rates and high levels of malnutrition fueling high mortality rates. There are also thousands more suspected measles cases in regions, which is already reeling from an ongoing Ebola epidemic.
Measles is a very serious disease that attacks children, and we parents do not know how to defend ourselves against this disease. That's why I wanted him to get the vaccine so that his body can develop immunity.
This campaign is meant to deal with a disease that is ravaging our children. The government organizes measles vaccination campaigns every 3 years. Now, the campaign was a little late, but with the measles epidemic ravaging our city, they have been able to organize it.
Meanwhile, the wife of Zimbabwe's vice president will spend Christmas behind bars after the magistrate's court remanded her in custody to December 30th on attempted murder charges. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya has more.
Mary Mbaiwa is alleged to have tampered with her husband's medical equipment while he was receiving medical care in neighboring South Africa in July this year. The vice president had been unwell and was out of the country getting medical attention for 4 months, initially in India and South Africa and eventually in China. His estranged wife's arrest coincides with comments he made over the weekend at a ZANU-PF conference where he warned that the purge on corruption would spare no one, including those people who know him personally. It also comes soon after he filed divorce papers against her last week. Mbaiwa also faces 11 counts of money laundering and foreign currency externalization involving hundreds of thousands of dollars used to purchase a house, 2 luxury vehicles and furniture in South Africa. She denies all the charges.
Justice will prevail at the end of the day, so we don't have to worry about that.
While the magistrate's court has denied bail, a higher court can overturn that decision. And earlier today, the defense team said that is the next port of call as they plan to lodge an appeal at the Master of the High Court. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Tunisia now, where a study by the National Office for Family and Population suggests that 47% of Tunisian women have been victims of violence. It reports that domestic, economic, physical, and psychological violence continue due to a male-dominated culture and gaps in the law. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi brings us more on that story.
Psychological and verbal abuses are the most common forms of violence against women. The state agency study was confirmed by the statistics gathered by the Gender Equality Observatory of the Center for Research, Studies, Documentation and Information on Women, CREDIF.
Violence against women is on the rise in Tunisia. This is a dangerous phenomenon. Cases of verbal violence against women reached 3,620, compared to 3,370 cases of physical violence and 511 cases of sexual violence.
The statistics of the Ministry of Social Affairs reveal that 55% of women are victims of psychological and physical violence and 32% of economic and sexual violence. The observatory had begun collecting data since 2015 in partnership with the United Nations Population Fund.
This program aims to collect the indicators and analyze them from the administrative registers of 5 ministries, namely the Ministries of Women, Health, Social Affairs, Justice and the Interior, with the aim to establish a national strategy to set specific indicators of violence against women.
Women's rights activists have launched a national campaign to combat sexual harassment in public transport.
The campaign started on social networks and digital platforms to denounce and expose sexual harassment. Victims and eyewitnesses can testify and contribute to stopping this phenomenon in public.
Activists have warned against continuing violations of women's rights, recalling its condemnation of each attack, regardless of its form, source or gravity, which could affect women and girls, violate their rights or limit their freedom. The National Union of Tunisian Women has called on the government to accelerate the creation of the National Observatory to combat violence against women, to monitor and report cases of violence in the 24 regions across the country. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
In Egypt, both government and ordinary citizens have been engaging in river cleanup campaigns. Around the world, 10 rivers contribute to 99% of plastic pollution in the oceans. The Nile River is one of them. Egypt is reported to be one of the main culprits responsible for plastic waste in the Nile.
The Nile provides Egypt with nearly 95% of its drinking and irrigation water. Yet the North African nation has been pouring loads of pollutants into the ancient river. In recent years, the government has been working hard to eliminate these sources of water pollution.
During the security void from 2011 to 2013, the Nile River has suffered from tremendous violations. Pollutants have been pouring in. During the past 5 years, Egypt has removed more than 50,000 sources of water pollution violations. All factories are now obliged to recycle their wastewater on multiple stages before pouring it in the Nile.
One of the biggest challenges all over Egypt is plastic waste. Removing it from the Nile has inspired many Egyptian youth to found NGOs and engage in cleanup campaigns.
I have always been concerned about the quality of drinking water, and that pushed me to learn more about the Nile pollution. I started speaking to people who throw litter in the Nile. Then I engaged in a bigger campaign. We started our work to clean the Red Sea. Our campaign picked up around 300 tons of plastic. That was in collaboration with other NGOs.
Thanks to the efforts of these young Egyptians, Nile cleanups have become a new trend. They have expanded their awareness efforts from adults to children when they found it more effective to teach the young about plastic harms to the environment before they develop the habit of throwing litter in the Nile.
NGOs are leading massive awareness and cleaning campaigns. Because the state cannot work on its own, NGOs have done a great job to remove plastic waste. Their efforts to remove the waste might not be significant to the volume of water in the Nile, but it's very effective in terms of highlighting the threats of water pollution.
The Nile stretches for more than 1,000 kilometers in Egypt. Because the mission to clean it up is much bigger than these NGOs, initiatives are now focusing on engaging more people. They are now approaching fishermen and wastewater sorters to teach them how to generate cash flow from picking up plastic from the river.
So simply converting a challenge to an opportunity
showing an added value is the key to the success of this.
Egypt plans to put an end to all industrial waste to the Nile by the year 2030.
Egypt's increasing population has pushed it halfway below the water security line. The country now realizes what's more important is to maintain a clean river, to maximize its usage out of this little water share. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more news making headlines. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business. Kenyan legislators approve a multilateral tax treaty that aims to boost the fight against corruption. And Boeing's board is considering whether or not to continue production of its much maligned 737 MAX.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Kenyan legislators have approved a multilateral tax treaty that's designed to boost the fight against corruption and illicit transfer of money across borders. Essentially, this treaty will allow the sharing of tax information with at least 135 other countries without Kenya having to enter into bilateral agreements. It also provides for administrative assistance in tax matters, including through judicial intervention. However, this is expected to happen 3 months after the country deposits the instruments of ratification in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Council of Europe. The committee has confirmed that 135 different countries have signed this convention as of the end of November 2019. Elsewhere, Nigeria and Brazil have committed to boost trade ties between their respective countries. The Brazilian External Affairs Minister, Ernesto Araújo, was on a working visit to Abuja and held talks with Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Geoffrey Onyama. Nigeria hopes to boost its economy through increased trade, improved agricultural exports, and quite a bit of multilateral trades too. Both countries are also partnering to counter insecurity. For the West African oil producer, the first step would be to improve the ease of doing business and investing in the country. Nigeria is a major petroleum supplier to Brazil, and trade volumes between the two countries run into the billions of dollars.
Look forward to engaging with you and increasing the level of economic relations between our two countries. And then, in the area of global peace, there are a lot of challenges that we see today. We look to cooperate with Brazil to strengthen multilateralism. We believe that this is really the best way to achieve a stable and prosperous world, and we hope we can count on Brazil's support.
We share concerns on the need to fight terrorism and to fight organized crime across the Atlantic. South Atlantic especially is becoming a challenge for the world, but we as important countries around the South Atlantic have a special responsibility, and we would like to address that responsibility together.
Now, speaking of the oil sector in Nigeria, there's a refinery being built there by the Dangote Group. It's expected, once complete, to save the country an estimated $10 billion in foreign exchange once it's up and running. The country's Minister of Finance and Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, also confirmed that the investment should ideally halt the importation of fuel products completely by 2023, while creating thousands of employment opportunities and boost Nigeria's economic outputs too. Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, revealed that Dangote Group's revenue would go up from $4 billion to at least $30 billion a year after the completion of this project in 2021. The refinery has a processing capacity of about 650,000 barrels of crude a day. It's set to essentially meet all the needs for liquid petroleum products within Nigeria. That in turn should initiate a drop of the prices of petroleum products at the pump as a result of the reduced cost of production. On to a completely different sector and a different country, the Botswana budget retailer Choppies has announced its exit from 3 more African markets. That comes in the wake of its announcement less than a fortnight ago that it would be selling its loss-making South African operation for just about 6 US cents. Choppies is set to dispose of its operations in 3 countries, Mozambique, Tanzania and Kenya, effectively cutting its footprint in half to just 4 countries. Its operations will continue in Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia and Namibia. In September last year, the retailer's shares fell by more than 60% due to the delay in the publication of its financial statements. But upon its release, it did post a $41.3 million loss after taxes in delayed results for that fiscal year. On to West Africa now. The Senegalese government recently announced a 6 to 10% increase in the price of electricity. Now, according to the country's national electricity company, Senelec, the rise is due to a shortfall of at least $20 million that it needs to invest in the grid in 2019. The increase, however, has not gone down well with consumers. Some Senegalese civil society organizations have created a No Lank movement, which essentially means we say no, to show their disagreement.
En 2016, certains pays voisins avaient révisé leurs tarifs d'électricité.
In 2016, some neighboring countries revisited their electricity prices. I would cite Ghana, Mali, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, and even France are all considering to do so. This trend is imposed on almost all oil and gas producing and even non-producing countries. Senegal, which is one of the same economic environment, could no longer continue to avoid the truth for prices.
I buy prepaid electricity before this increase with $17 US. I had electricity for 1 month. Now, with the same amount, I only have electricity for 10 days. It's too expensive for me.
We urge that the government stop this increase in the price of electricity. The increase will impact all sectors and all basic necessities will increase.
Further afield, Boeing is considering whether to reduce or just completely stop production of its now grounded 737 MAX jets after the Federal Aviation Administration said just last week that it would not approve the aircraft's return to service before 2020. Sources close to the matter say that a temporary shutdown is more likely than another production cut. The best-selling Boeing aircraft has been grounded since March after 2 fatal crashes, one in Indonesia and another in Ethiopia, in which 346 people were killed.
I can also tell you that we have looked deeply at the MAX and its design and the processes over the last year. And the software update, we have extraordinary confidence in. As I said, we've flown 700 test flights with that software, dozens and dozens of simulations with customers. But in addition to the updates to the airplane, which add redundancy to make it even safer, we're also working on updated training packages for pilots and maintainers. So it's a holistic solution that will give us all confidence that this airplane will be one of the safest ever to fly.
Daimler's main China joint venture partner, that's the Beijing Automotive Group, has set in motion a plan to double its stake in the company to around 10% and secure a board seat on the German luxury car maker. That move comes as Daimler aims to essentially upstage its rival Geely. State-owned BAIC already owns at least 5% in Daimler, and it has started accumulating the German company shares in the open market. BAIC is currently Daimler's 3rd largest single shareholder. A 10% stake would effectively make it the biggest single shareholder, surpassing the Chinese automaking rival Zhejiang Geely Holding Group, which owns about 9.69% of the car maker. With a 10% stake, BAIC is looking to secure a seat in Daimler's supervisory board.
The Chinese are eager to invest in European know-how in Daimler. In China Daimler, Mercedes is extremely popular. It is important that we keep our German signature, because it doesn't make any sense if at some point Mercedes are being manufactured in China and then sold in Germany. Climate protection is very important, but one shouldn't stop at just talking about it. but also make money with it. Why not? If climate protection is that important, why don't we start a second economic boom in Germany and Europe? Which means we deliberately invest in pollution control of the environment and earn money with it.
And finally, Egypt's national carrier, EgyptAir, is now flying direct from Cairo to Hangzhou, adding to its existing roster of destinations in China. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has all the details.
The new route has raised EgyptAir's destinations to 3 cities in China, doubling the number of flights to and from China.
EgyptAir had started with only one destination. It was to Beijing 3 times a week. Later, it launched another route to Guangzhou on a daily basis, and now a third route to Hangzhou 2 times a week, all developed within a short span of time.
China is seen as a major tourism market for Egypt. The new flight routes are part of efforts by Cairo to increase the number of visitors to the North African country.
So basically, China is one of the biggest markets for outbound tourism. So when we look at from a macro level, you will find that 174 million travelers from China per year, with an average spend of $180 million per year. So the number that Egypt has managed to get like a couple of years ago was around only 115,000 travelers, and the number that we managed to reach during this year, 2019, is actually that we doubled this amount, getting closer to 250,000 travelers from Chinese tourists.
Experts are calling for more creative efforts to attract Chinese tourists.
We need as well to start creating the Chinese products, from a travel perspective, that they will like. So China is mainly exporting like to say Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia. Now from our region you have from the Middle East, Dubai starting getting business from them. Definitely as well Europe, London and Paris. And Egypt is a great destination for them because they like a lot the culture and heritage tours. So by creating the packages that they will like, the product that fits their criteria, widening as well the level of service and the tour guides that speak Mandarin, it will actually facilitate the process and will start attracting more tourists from China.
The new flights are not only targeting tourists. EgyptAir is facilitating travel for businessmen as well, to promote bilateral trade and investments. That's Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And I'll leave you there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at Ghana's year of return. You've probably heard about it, but how's it benefited the country's tourism sector? We'll explore that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Rama. We're looking forward to that. We'll see you in a bit. For now, let's take a short break and return. Artists in Ethiopia show off at the largest annual exhibition in Addis Ababa.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Artists in Ethiopia have showed up for the largest annual exhibition in Addis Ababa. This is the 11th round of the event. This year, the country's top artists, whose works are well known both locally and internationally, showcase their work. The Art of Ethiopia exhibition is hailed for developing the country's art industry. Here's CGTN's Giram Chala with that story.
Hundreds of artists from different backgrounds and resemblance showcased their base works on this year's Arts of Ethiopia exhibition. From reality to abstract, Even creative works were on display for close to a week.
Most of my artworks focus on Ethiopian history and culture, as well as history and religion. I use my own technique and experience. I do not only use brushes, but also apply different experiments into my work.
My works are based on the Euro scenery, and what I have tried to show is the common human behavior displayed in animals. For instance, it could be about motherhood. Motherhood can be seen between non-humans, so such commonalities attract you here to my works.
Before and now, my works come from my deepest thinking about my environment. My works evolve the more I grow as well. This time I have focused on gratitude and faith.
Every day and for 5 consecutive days, art lovers have flocked in here, admiring the works as well as the progress as seen over the years.
It's interesting. It's really growing every year. I've been here almost. I've attended all of them in the past 11 years. The first one was quite small and was limited to few artists. But now through the years, new artists, new techniques, new ideas and themes are coming up, and it's really nice. I think that even the visitors' number have gone up significantly.
The organizers of Arts of Ethiopia exhibition say this yearly event has played key roles both for the growth of the industry in the country and in making artists much more creative.
The main purpose of this show is to introduce the Ethiopian art for the international and also for the local community, and to give a chance for the artists, to support the artists. So some of the artists, they have art galleries, but a lot of them, they don't have art galleries or they cannot show off their artwork. So this is creating opportunity for the artists.
Come next year, the organizers tell you the Art of Ethiopia exhibition will return larger and stronger. And based on the reactions from the audience here, many are looking forward to seeing the new artworks at the upcoming 12th edition. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Your sports news is coming up after the break. Here's a highlight. Egypt crowned champions after scooping 20 gold medals at the African Junior Canoe and Kayak Championship.
How would you create